Thank you all for coming today, and I will just start with a quote from Frederick Douglass that reads, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." And that's Frederick Douglass. In the last 48 hours, we have witnessed something that we're becoming all too familiar with, and that is the use of deadly force by law enforcement that leaves families shattered. And we have the case of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that fortunately was caught on video. We have the case of Philando Castile in Minnesota that was fortunately caught on tape. And we assemble here as the Congressional Black Caucus, and you will see a lot of young African-American males today that will speak that if we were not in a suit and tie and in the halls of Congress, we would look just like the victims of this deadly force. And because of that, we feel obligated to speak out about justice and injustice. One thing that I want to make clear is that as members of Congress and as beneficiaries of protest and the civil rights movement, for many of us that are on this stage, we understand the role of our communities and our citizens to protest and to make their voices heard. But we have an obligation as the very few African Americans in this country that have the ability to talk on the House floor, introduce legislation, and do the things that we're privileged enough to do, to speak up and take their voices from the streets to the halls of Congress, to the White House, to the Justice Department, and everywhere else that they should be. Now, I won't talk long, although the Alton Sterling incident occurred in my district. We want to make sure that the likelihood of getting justice in this country when you are the recipient of deadly force by an officer is not impacted by demography or geography. It should not matter what you look like or where you live. And because of that, many of us plan on introducing a Bill of Rights bill for victims and their families of deadly force by the hands of law enforcement that will give you a right to an independent investigation, that will give you a right to an independent autopsy, and that will give you a right to an independent prosecutor. The one thing that we all share is that we are all a product of our life experiences. And our life experiences, and my life experience, is very similar to that of the victims. But our life experiences collectively, so if we look at New Orleans and the Danziger Bridge, where law enforcement, the same department was left to investigate the same department for killing 2 people on the Danziger Bridge in New Orleans. Well, they conducted an entire investigation, concluded that the victims fired upon the police first, and they exonerated the New Orleans Police Department, their fellow colleagues. Well, after years, the federal government came in, the FBI came and investigated, and found out not only did the victims not fire on the police, but that they never had weapons, and that the entire investigation was fabricated by the police department. And those officers have recently taken a plea deal and now are serving time. So if that is your life experience, that's why it's very important that in Baton Rouge, the federal government come in, DOJ, FBI, the Assistant U.S. Attorney, well, the U.S. Attorney's Office, take the lead in investigating the incident. And we know that the overwhelming majority, 99% of our police officers wake up every day, put their lives on the line, risk going home to their families to protect and serve us. But just like there are a small percentage of bad politicians, small percentage of bad preachers, small percent of bad teachers, there are a small percent of bad police officers. And we just need to make sure the standards or protocols are in place so that when incidents like this happen, communities, especially communities that are skeptical of their relationship between law enforcement and them, that we do something as a Congress and as a country to make sure that those investigations are both thorough and transparent. So I thank my colleagues for being here. Now we'll turn it over to Keith Ellison, who represents the mother of Philando Castile, who was, we all saw the images yesterday, and I will let him take it from there. Keith.
Cedric, thanks for calling us together. Hashtag Trayvon Martin, hashtag Mike Brown, hashtag Tamir Rice, hashtag Keon Livingston, hashtag Walter Scott, hashtag Sandra Bland, hashtag Eric Garner, now hashtag Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. The reason we're before you right now is because all of us know that we could be a hashtag. And we don't want our children to be hashtags because they were murdered by the police or killed by the police or anyone. This is a national crisis. Every time we look up, there is some African-American person, and I think it's important to remember it's mostly men, but it's women too, that are being killed by the police. And now more and more on video. We have got to call for this nation to step up and make sure that every citizen enjoys the full protection of the law. Now, you might think, well, you know, people getting in trouble, you know, what were they doing that would draw them into a negative relationship with the police? Well, I can tell you that Philando Castile was pulled over for a taillight, routine traffic, pulled over as he was asked. He tried to reach for his license. He told them he was licensed to carry a firearm, told them that he was reaching for it, and was shot. But for the presence of mind of that young lady, Diamond, to start a live stream to show us and narrate in real time, we would have this highly controverted mess and nobody would really know what happened after it was all over, and there'd be no accountability whatsoever. There was a 4-year-old girl in that car when that shooting happened. You might think, well, you guys, you know, it's the old Confederacy, Louisiana. Well, I'm from Minnesota. It's down south. It's up north. It's East Coast. It's West Coast. It's Midwest. It's a national problem. And African Americans have the right to enjoy the full protection of the law. Let me say this. Philando Castile, his case should not be brought before a grand jury. The prosecutor should take full responsibility for the charging decision. They cannot whitewash these cases with these grand juries. It happens every day and all the time. Of course, we need federal intervention. And I just want to wrap up by saying this. We have a sacred and moral responsibility to call attention to this moral outrage that is happening all over our cities, in all of our countries and rural towns every day. Police accountability must prevail in this land, and we're committed to fight for it. And now I'll call before you all, my good friend and everyone else, is Andre Carson from Indianapolis.
Thank you, Keith. And thank you, Cedric, Hakeem, and the entire Congressional Black Caucus. I have to reiterate that our thoughts and our prayers are with the families and the victims in Louisiana, Minnesota, and across this country. You know, your pain and your loss are again drawing attention, national attention, international attention to this very heartbreaking issue. You know, we're here today as members of Congress, and many of us have experiences on both sides of the coin. On one hand, many of us who are young African-American men and certainly women, and we see young black men in particular around this country harassed, abused, and killed by police officers with no repercussions. As a teenager, at the age of 17, I was arrested. Used to being harassed, but I was arrested unjustly by a police officer. I made it out unscathed, but I can relate, as Cedric mentioned, to the pain and outrage felt by so many in our community. On the other hand, I'm a former police officer. Now, I've worked with countless men and women who work each and every day to keep our communities safe. And these are law-abiding, dedicated public servants. But I know that the pull is strong to stand up for fellow police officers, to give them the benefit of the doubt and to protect them from accusations. But I stand here today as a former police officer, but most importantly as a black man, to say that enough is enough. So far this year, police have killed more than 500 people, including at least 115 black men. Now, many of these were unarmed, and most of them never resisted or posed a bodily harm or threat to the officers responsible. As a cop, I find this revolting. Now, these shooters weren't my brothers in blue. They're murderers, and they should be treated as such. No cop, no prosecutor, judge, or jury should stand up for a cop who kills an innocent person in cold blood. Yet time and time again, we see police officers getting off scot-free. Indictments are extremely rare. Even those prosecuted are rarely convicted. And sadly, we all know this problem too well, but there is no easy fix. But all of us here today are committed to doing what we can and what we must. We need to strengthen our support for our community policing apparatus, where cops come from and know the communities they patrol. We must ensure officers receive proper training, including de-escalation of difficult situations. There is a theory or a school of thought in law enforcement I was taught in the police academy. It's controversial, but it's called the 1+1 theory. And it deals with using proportional force and de-escalating situations. So if an officer encounters someone and the aggression verbally is equal, you meet verbal aggression with verbal aggression. If it escalates, the philosophy says you use pepper spray. If it keeps escalating, you're supposed to use a baton, and the last resort would be a firearm. But as we've seen through the blessing of social media and smartphones, they don't even deal with the first few steps, they go to the final step. Part of that is the mythology of black inferiority that still has not been addressed successfully. Our departments need a zero-tolerance policy for racial and ethnic profiling. And since local authorities so rarely indict and convict police officers, we have to mandate independent, outside investigations for every police shooting. But above all, we need to rebuild the broken trust between law enforcement and our communities. And cops should not see every young black man or woman as a threat. So we stand here with a purpose. We want every black community that feels threatened by police to know that you have voices on Capitol Hill. And we want good, honorable police officers everywhere to know that you don't have to stand for this. And we're all affected by this, and we all need to come together to solve it. So today we stand together as a Congressional Black Caucus and the Straight Outta Congress movement, and we're here to say enough is enough. We are officially requesting a meeting with the Attorney General, the FBI Director Comey, law enforcement leaders like the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and the Fraternal Order of Police. But as a nation, the most important thing is that we resist the impulses to let these tragedies divide us, and instead use these tragedies as a time of healing and unity. And I bring to you a rising star in our party and in the country, my dear friend, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries.
I thank my colleagues and the leadership, of course, of Congressman Cedric Richmond. We are in the midst of a police violence epidemic here in America that should shock the conscience of the nation. We find ourselves in a situation where time and time again, African American men are struck down by police officers without justification and then not held accountable by the criminal justice system. We are better than this in America. But in order for us to deal with the epidemic that we are confronting right now, an epidemic that takes us from the north to the south, to the east, to the Midwest, and to the West, an epidemic that is prevalent in all 50 states, and an issue that impacts all of the communities that we represent collectively as members of the Congressional Black Caucus. In order for us to deal with the police violence epidemic in America in a meaningful way, we need to have an open and honest discussion about the problem. We've come a long way in America, but we still have a long way to go. As these incidents again remind us, racism is alive and well in America. There are far too many young black men who are viewed as clear and present dangers simply because of the way they look, absent any justification. There are several of us who are members of the hip-hop generation. We stand here as lawmakers. But if we were to take off our suit and our tie, there are many police officers throughout the country who would treat us like lawbreakers, simply because of the color of our skin. And if America is not prepared to deal with that reality, we will continue to find ourselves here time and time again. We've got to be honest and open and have real talk if we're going to confront this problem. Because there are an overwhelming majority of police officers who are there to protect and serve and do the right thing, but every department throughout America has been impacted in some way by the cancer of racism that has been in this country from the very moment that Africans were enslaved. And it continues to impact our country like a malignant tumor. That's the only way that you can explain the fact that we've got a problem in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a problem in Minnesota, a problem in Staten Island, a problem in North Charleston, a problem in Baltimore, a problem in Columbus, Ohio, a problem all across the country. And so one of the things that we're calling for is for an immediate closed-door conversation with Speaker Paul Ryan and the relevant committee chairmen, including Bob Goodlatte of the Judiciary Committee, to which several of us currently sit, to discuss what we in Congress must do to deal with this issue. We have a national problem. It requires a national solution, and that is why Congress must act. Let me observe in closing that at the same time that we're trying to address the issue of police violence directed at African Americans throughout this country, there are many in this Capitol, in the Senate and the House, who have come to the conclusion that suspected terrorists should be allowed to purchase weapons of war, even if they're on the no-fly list, because of due process. Where is the due process for Alton? Where was the due process for Eric Garner? Where was the due process for Tamir Rice? Where was the due process for Freddie Gray? Where was the due process for Walter Scott? If our friends on the other side of the aisle are really concerned about due process and the 14th Amendment in America, let's deal with the issue of police violence. It's now my honor and my privilege to turn the microphone over to one of the additional younger members of Congress who have dealt with these issues throughout his life, and that's the Honorable Mark Vesey, representing communities of Fort Worth and Dallas, Texas.
Thank you, Congressman Jeffries. And one of the things that makes me upset the most whenever you try to have a conversation about race in America is that people from all walks of life, all professional backgrounds will say, I don't see race, I'm colorblind. You hear that often. But we know with the situations that have already been laid out that, especially when it comes to black men that are being stopped by the police, that these police are not colorblind at all, that they see race, that they see blackness clear and well. And there's been some unfortunate incidents that have occurred because of that. And for people that are out here watching today that may say that this is an isolated incident, I just want to remind you of what has happened in the last couple of years. In South Carolina, there was an African-American man that was pulled over by the police at a gas station. And when pulled over, he asked the police what to do. The policeman told him that he wanted to see his driver's license and his insurance, and that it was in the car. When the police officer told him to get his driver's license and insurance, and the man reached into the car, the policeman shot him. It was on tape, clear. We saw another situation that has already been mentioned in South Carolina with Walter Scott. Not only was he shot in the back, but we saw that the policeman pick up evidence and try to plant evidence next to the body after he was already shot and killed. We saw another incident, I believe it was in Ohio, where a black man was going into a convenience store or into a large sporting goods store to buy a BB gun, to legally purchase a BB gun, and the police followed him in there and shot him and killed him. So we know that these incidents are happening over and over and over again. And not only do we need to have a discussion about race in this country, and race as it relates to African-American males and the interactions that we have with the police when we are pulled over, but we also need to start having serious discussions on how we can prevent these incidents from happening. We need for police departments around the country to acknowledge that we need better training, that we need better tactics to deal with de-escalation, as was already mentioned, and that we need to do everything we can to prevent more incidents like this from happening. And we need to be honest about the fact that race is playing a factor in each and every one of these incidents that have been described today. And we know that it's not just these incidents. There are many incidents that never make it into the paper that we don't know about, that people are going through every day. And the people that are having to deal with this disproportionately on a daily basis are African American males. We need to acknowledge that as well. I want to thank Congressman Richmond and Hakeem and everybody else that has put this together, because we need to start having the conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I really am honored to join my colleagues, Cedric Richmond, Hakeem Jeffries, Mark Vesey, and Andre Carson as part of the hip-hop generation on top of Capitol Hill. As Mr. Carson stated, being arrested at 17, it reminded me of a story. I was about 20 years old and driving my cousin's car, and I was wrong. I made a U-turn, and officer, a motorcycle cop, pulled me over and asked me for the registration and my license and all. Being my cousin's car, I could not find it quickly enough for him, and he proceeded to say, use the N-word, and said, if you don't find that stuff soon, I'll throw you so far under the jail they'll never find you. Now, this is what African American men go through every single day, and they don't have any recourse. And some of them end up dead. Due process, the officers are there to arrest if necessary. They're not the judge and jury. That is what is happening. They are executing black males. I was fortunate. I didn't end up in the jail because I just happened to be the son of a councilman in the city of Newark. And once I displayed my license, the tenor changed dramatically. He's like, well, you know, you need to be careful making U-turns on the street. You could get hurt or hurt someone. I became a person because I was connected to someone. But think of all the black men that don't have a connection and what they suffer at the hands of the police. Black Lives Matter. You wonder why you get a movement like that? It's because of the situations that we have and we see and that we're exposed to every single day as black males. It's true. Take this jacket and tie off and put on a baseball cap and some jeans, and God knows what you could be subjected to. This has to stop. We're serious about this movement. It is time for us to have black males respected as human beings, not targets. Thank you.
We'll now have our leadership within the Black Caucus and Congress. Next up will be Congressman Jim Clyburn, who's the assistant leader, followed by G.K. Butterfield, who is the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. And then we will have Congressman Bobby Scott, who is the ranking member on education and led criminal justice reform for so long. And then we will close it out with Sheila Jackson Lee, who is now the ranking member on the crime subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee, who has fought for this for such a long time. So if you will please just come in that order.
Thank you very much, Cedric, Hakeem, Andre. I have been asked a question several times in recent weeks about my position on the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, if all goes well for the next 2 weeks, I'll celebrate my 76th birthday. Now, when I was a teenager, I joined with John Lewis in a movement that became known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC. I remember going home one weekend and going to church, the church that my father pastored. Some of the church members were very nervous about my coming back to Sunday school because they had been reading about what we were doing, and they weren't too sure about what we were doing. But what we were doing was responding to an issue of the time, an issue that said to me and others who looked like me, even my mom and dad, that if you want to ride this bus, you have to sit on the back. If you want to purchase a hamburger in Woolworths or S.H. Crest, you could purchase it, but you couldn't sit down to eat it. We responded to that. There was a certain indignity that we were responding to. The young people in the Black Lives Matter movement today are responding to some indignities that you've just heard a lot about here today. They aren't threatening anybody. They're trying to call attention to the fact that they want to receive due process under the heading of justice. I was elected to Congress in November 1992. On the morning after my election, I went to an office building in Columbia to have breakfast on the top floor in the City Club. I got on the elevator, and as I was riding up to the 18th floor, somewhere around the 10th or 11th floor, the elevator stopped. And when the door opened, there were two non-black people standing to get on the elevator. When they saw me, they stepped back and would not get on the elevator. Newly elected to Congress, I was reminded on the morning afterwards of who and what I was. I was not a newly elected member of Congress. I was a black guy that they did not feel safe to be associated with. Now, I represent North Charleston. I've known Walter Scott's mother since I was 26 years old. That's 50 years I've known her. One of his surviving brothers is a fraternity brother of mine. He did not deserve to be shot 8 times in the back by a police officer who stopped him because of a taillight. Now, I was reminded recently of a discussion I had with a lady who I talk about often, Rowena Tobias, one of Charleston's blue blood, who said to me one day, she said, you know, Charleston is a great city. South Carolina is a good state. And we have been able to become great and good because we've been able to sit down and talk about all the problems that exist in our various communities, save one. This is the reason we have not done better as a state and as a city, is because every time the question of race comes up, we stop talking. She said to me on that occasion, I want you to make me a promise that as you move through life, please don't stop talking. The reason we can't solve these problems up here is because they won't let issues come to the floor. So we can debate them, talk about them, and find some common ground upon which to resolve them. The reason we can't solve this race question is because we won't talk about it. We pretend that it doesn't exist. We know it does. I have 2 grandchildren, one of whom is 21 years old and a college student. He's in his 4th year. I don't know what classification he is. I talked to him a lot last week. I talked to him about how to conduct himself if he were stopped for a traffic violation, if he is questioned by the police officer, the kind of discussion I ought not have to have with my grandson. I should not be able to have to say to my grandson, son, you got to deny your manhood if you want to ensure that you come home alive. And that's what some of these discussions are all about. Black lives do matter. And we here in the Congress must mature enough, grow up enough to have the kinds of adult discussions about the issues that plague us as a country in a way that will allow us to find the common ground that's necessary to resolve them. With that, I'll yield to the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, G.K. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Leader Clyburn. As chairman of the 45-member Congressional Black Caucus, I want to use my time this afternoon simply extending a thank you to all of the members who have participated in this press conference this afternoon. In particular, thank Cedric Richmond, Keith Ellison, Andre Carson, Hakeem Jeffries, and Mark Veazey. These gentlemen have worked tirelessly to address this issue and to bring it to the attention not only to the leadership here in Congress, but to the attention of the nation. And so as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, I simply want to give validity to what has been said today and to let you know that these remarks reflect the sentiments and views of the entire Congressional Black Caucus. We are not stopping. This is the beginning of a movement. I said that on the floor during the sit-in last week. This is the beginning of a movement that will not stop. We will have some more announcements as the weekend goes on. We will have another press conference tomorrow that will address some other issues that may be of interest to you and the media. And so suffice it to say that the Congressional Black Caucus fully supports everything that you have heard today. We are demanding action from the Republican leadership. No longer are we going to sit back and allow the Republican leadership to ignore this crisis that we have in America. So thank you for covering this event this afternoon. Thank my colleagues for your passion and for your activism. More to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, GK and the members of the Black Caucus who have come together today to talk about gun violence. I don't know how many of you heard Mr. Al Green on the floor today, where he talked about he has been holding in and suffering for 68 years because he has watched the loss of black men in particular in his city, in his community, in his neighborhoods. His mother always taught him, be kind to the police. If you get stopped, do whatever they tell you. Make sure your hands are showing, on and on and on. But that's what black mothers and fathers tell their children and their black boys in particular. Don't make any funny moves. Make sure that you do nothing that the police can credibly say that you caused them to shoot you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what has been said here today. I don't know what has been said in other places. But in the last 48 hours, I'm sure it has already been said. Alton Sterling of Baton Rouge, Philando Castile of Falcon Heights, Minnesota, both lost their lives in a manner that has become all too familiar to us. With Philando Castile from Falcon Heights, they were stopped because of a busted taillight. You shouldn't lose your life because you're stopped for a broken taillight. And when we watch what has happened on television and through our computers, etc., it is absolutely heartbreaking. I went to bed last night listening to a woman scream, God, please don't let him be dead. God, please don't let him have killed my boyfriend. God, he did everything they told him to do. They told him to get his license. He went to get his license, and he also said, I am a security guard registered. I have a weapon that is registered. And the minute he said it, going after his license, he was shot 4 times. This woman was screaming, and her 4-year-old child was saying, Mommy, I'm here. I'm with you, Mommy. It was such that I could not really sleep the rest of the night. And it was just the day before in Baton Rouge where we saw Alton Sterling pinned down to the ground. Could not have been dangerous to anybody. They had him pinned down, and they shot and killed him. Well, this story of black men, and yes, some black women, being killed over and over again by people who are paid to protect and serve us has got to stop. I've been fighting this for years. When I came to this Congress, I came with a reputation out of Los Angeles fighting against Daryl Gates, the police chief that we ran out of office. I started with the killing of Eula Love, who was shot down on her porch with her 2 daughters watching because she could not afford to pay a $29 gas bill. They called the police and they killed her because she refused to let them turn her gas off. So this is not a new issue for me. And I organized and we confronted, we went to the police commission, we went on, we did everything that we could do to run Daryl Gates out. When you saw that chokehold of Eric Gardner up in New York, it started in Los Angeles with Daryl Gates. Whether it was the chokehold or the battering ram or other tactics that were used, that they were killing black men, we had it all in Los Angeles. This battle never stops. We got a consent decree, and we have worked on these issues, but they keep flaring up over and over again. I'm here today because my message is really to the police chiefs of this nation and the city council members and the boards of supervisors. The police chiefs have the responsibility for training and development, and the buck has got to stop somewhere. To the members of city councils who control these budgets, you have the power to use the influence of your office to stop these killings and to get people out of these police positions who continually have records that show they're dangerous. And so, after sending this message the best way that I possibly can to the police chiefs and to the city councils, let me say to the police around this country, don't kill another black man. Don't kill another black woman stopped for a traffic light unarmed. You got to stop this killing, and we cannot be silent anymore. Black Lives Matter, these young people who are out there by themselves, we got to get out of this Congress and go with them to these police commissions and do whatever is necessary to deal with this issue. We're fighting gun violence? Yes. And we hear about the massacres? Yes. Whether it's Newtown, or whether it's Emanuel 9, or whether it's Columbine, or any of these, we hear about it, and we get the moments of silence on the floor. But for all of these young men, and black men in particular, who have been killed constantly, day in and day out, again, nobody has a moment of silence for them. All we leave are grieving mothers for the most part. Grieving mothers, wondering why their sons have been killed. And so with that, I was deemed, and others will be deemed, who take on the police as anti-police. We were threatened on the floor about our conduct, and the leadership said, related to the gun violence issues that we're on, they was going to take us to the ethics committee. And I said, come get me, I've been there before. And we'll go back again. To those people who say that we're anti-police, you can call me whatever you want to. I'm sick and tired of this. And we've got to move in a way that demands action. Enough said. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the leaders, particularly Representative Richmond, for calling us together. We've had a lot about the problem. Let me just add that there have been 5 police killings in Norfolk, Virginia, probably on a per capita basis, the most in the nation. But there are solutions, one of which is first gather the facts. We passed a year and a half ago the Deaths in Custody Reporting Act, which requires the Department of Justice to gather evidence of all deaths in the custody of police and law enforcement, including in process of arrest, to gather all of the data so we know what we're talking about and we can legislate from the facts. We know what the, and it also requires, by December of this year, a report analyzing the data so that we know exactly what needs to be done. But of course, we know that's going to include training of police officers, particularly in de-escalation and implicit bias. It's going to include the recommendations for body cameras, but basically to prevent incidences before they occur so we don't have to get into the criminal justice system, which will require more independent investigations and prosecutions. Also, as Representative Waters said, we have to make democracy work. The localities, the city councils have to use the democratic process to make sure that we are selecting the right police officers and that they're policing in the correct way. But this police training and body cameras will cost money. And that's why the Safe Justice Act includes funding for the police training and body cameras. That bill has significant bipartisan support. We also have to invest in our youth so they're not getting into problems to begin with. But in the last 30 years, we've seen that the investments in prisons is about 3 times more than investments in elementary and secondary education. The ratio of higher education to prisons has just flipped. We're now spending a lot more in prisons than higher education, and that's as a result of simple-minded policies like mandatory minimums that just build up the prisons to the point where we have only 5% of the population, but 25% of the prisoners and so many people in jail that recent studies have shown that the incarceration rate is actually counterproductive. Anything over 500 per 100,000, one study said, is counterproductive. You're just messing up too many families. You've got too many people with felony records, can't find jobs. They're using so much of the Department of Justice budget that could be put to better use, and it's not doing anything in crimes. 500 per 100,000, we're at 700 and some per 100,000 already. In the black community, it's over 2,000. Some states, 4,000 per 100,000. That money needs to be put into prevention and early intervention and education efforts that can be found in the Youth Promise Act that we're considering now as part of the juvenile justice reauthorization. So there are a lot of things that we can do. And so we're not here just to complain. We have a legislative agenda to actually accomplish things and to solve the problem. But it's not going to solve itself. We have to pass these bills. Thank you. And I introduce the ranking member of the Crime Subcommittee on Judiciary, Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, for your leadership, particularly on the education and labor. Let me also acknowledge Cedric Richmond, Mr. Veazey, Mr. Ellison, Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Payne, for all of you, Mr. Carson, and thank you to our chairman, Mr. G.K. Butterfield. And as I feel overwhelmed today, let me give a sort of chronological journey of our day and say to you that this morning in our meeting, 2 men cried as they were relaying their passion and feeling about the last 48 hours. And so as you've heard passion from many of the members, I want to just offer to say that I stand here as many of the women members have come to join us in the name or in the sense of the mother of the oldest son or the son of the individual, Sterling, in Louisiana, who could not comprehend this son, that he had lost his father. And then as well to the person who was in the car with Mr. Castile. I stand here in her name. Mr. Castile had a girlfriend and a 4-year-old girl in that car. So I believe that what we have offered today, I will reinforce. The Judiciary Committee will be getting a letter that will be asking for full hearings on this question. As I left Houston, 3 people were killed during the July 4th on the basis of dealing with gun violence. And we have been addressing gun violence this week in a bipartisan, a multicultural way. We have sought bipartisan support. But it is imperative that we take a pause and be able to say to America that the gun violence that comes under the color of law cannot continue. We cannot have Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, and Michael Brown, Mr. Castile, Mr. Sterling, and many others, and Sandra Bland, and others who have been lost in our districts. We've introduced the Law Enforcement and Integrity Act, which deals with the question of training for police officers. We need the national police leadership to recognize that this is not an indictment of all of the good police officers that many of us call 911. It is a recognition that there is a fracture in the training for 21st century police as opposed to 18th century and 19th century. And I'll just simply say that I had the occasion, as I often do, to shake the hands with my police officers, to tell them thank you, and to talk with them. They said, Congresswoman, we're not trained to maim or stop. We're trained to kill. And in urban settings, that is not a tolerable total approach. And so the Law Enforcement Integrity Act deals with that. But I want to join with Cedric and this array of African-American members, male members of Congress, for a meeting with the Attorney General, for a meeting with the Speaker, for a meeting with the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House and in the Senate, calling upon hearings. The voices of Black Lives Matter were never silenced. We were always listening. But now we have to carry it to a point, as we have been working deliberatively, getting bills. Now the leadership has to address this question. And I, for one, will join with you, Cedric, on the number of bills that you intend to introduce, co-sponsor them, as well as push for the Law Enforcement and Integrity Act, which has been introduced by myself and John Conyers, the ranking member, and to emphasize that the National Organization of Law Enforcement Executives, Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, have been front and center on supporting this kind of retraining of our law enforcement, de-escalation. I cry for those 2 dead men in the last 48 hours who did not deserve to die. I mourn for those long lists that we have called, including Tamir, 12, 13 years old, and Trayvon Martin, who died under color of law and some civilian patrol. You cannot kill randomly without justice and prosecution, only hiding under color of law. There are too many good cops that allow this disastrous pattern to continue. Thank you for your leadership, and thank all of you, and I join you in your efforts.
Thank you. We'll take any questions that you have, and I'll let Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia lead off the answers to the questions.
This is actually directed towards you, Congressman Richmond Ryan Kerr with RT America. Louisiana District Attorney Hiller Moore said that the officers Salamani and Lake may have acted within their rights, calling the shooting, quote, potentially a state-authorized killing. Do you have any comments on that?
I think that what we're trying to do, especially in Baton Rouge right now, and with the governor's help, the Attorney General, well, the U.S. Attorney there, with the DA, and with the Chief of State Police, is make sure that we get all the facts out, and then we draw conclusions. And I will just tell you that what's very uncomfortable for people is the old adage of, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? And that video is very clear. It's very disturbing. But there's still 3 or 4 videos that are left to be produced. One is the surveillance from the store. One would be whatever the 2 body cameras show. And then you have another which would be from the dash cam of the videos. But I have not seen the district attorney's comments. And I think that it only highlights the fact that you have to have a independent investigation into police misconduct. And the DA supported bringing in the Department of Justice to lead this investigation.
Congressman Deborah Berry with USA Today. Can you speak to, especially as a member of the judiciary, can you speak to the political realities of having a hearing on this issue anytime soon?
Hank is a senior member of Judiciary, and Hank Johnson can take that.
Yeah, I came today to lend my voice to those who cry out in anguish about the deaths of Philandro Castile and Alton Sterling, 2 young men who lost their lives over the span of 48 hours. It has not stopped yet. It has been going on forever. The loss of life by African Americans at the hands of law enforcement. Yes, we have a difficult issue as Congresspeople, blacks in the United States of America in Congress. We have a difficulty, all 46 of us, in bringing this issue to the top of the mind of the Republicans who control both the House and Senate. We've been relentless in focusing attention on this issue, even as the greater body of Democrats focus on the issue of mass killings. We've been focusing on the everyday homicides that go on in the African American community that don't draw a moment of silence. It's if no one really cares because they don't live in the communities like we do. And we understand, we know, we feel the pain, we see the anguish of the relatives and friends left behind. We see the victims who are left wounded badly in the streets, in wheelchairs. You know, we love our people, we love our communities, we fight for our communities. We'll continue to do that. And however long it takes before we are successful at gaining hearings on this particular issue, the homicide of African Americans at the hands of law enforcement in America, a historical problem. We won't stop until we are successful at having hearings and passing legislation to address this problem.
This is for Mr. Jeffries. You know, for years in New York, you saw stop and frisk, obviously, when you were a member of the legislature, and DOJ didn't say anything about it for 13 years. What would make you think that DOJ is the answer to the problem of interactions of civilians and police? And also, I know you have an oversight hearing coming up with Loretta Lynch. Are you going to ask her about death in custody not being implemented? The bill has effectively been ignored. We signed the law in 2014. And what faith do you have in DOJ if they can't even be bothered to count the deaths in custody, to do anything about deaths in custody?
Well, I expect that we'll raise a variety of issues with Attorney General Lynch, I believe, next Tuesday when she comes before several of us on the Judiciary Committee. In terms of my faith and confidence in the Department of Justice, I think that it is a part of the solution, not the entire solution. But as Congressman Richmond indicated, it's clear we cannot rely on local district attorneys to aggressively and comprehensively prosecute police departments that they rely upon to make their day-to-day criminal cases. And as we've seen in the Eric Garner case and a variety of others all across the country, that won't work. Now, we do have a shot as it relates to the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights. Attorney General Lynch started her career as a senior prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York, putting away Justin Volpe, who was an officer who brutally sodomized Abner Louima in an infamous case in New York and Brooklyn in the 1990s. And so I've got confidence that she understands excessive force and police brutality when she sees it, and that the Department of Justice will be prepared to follow the facts to a legitimate conclusion.
Well, let me just thank you all for coming out, and I think that we did a very clear job of laying out what we're going to be asking for and the things that we demand, and Bobby and Sheila talked about legislation and that offers solutions. So we will continue to push forward, and we will continue to introduce legislation. Thank you all. Thank you.
It's all right. Hurry up if you want to do that. Go.